Hi, I'm Peter Russell. I'm a chartered accountant located here in Mississauga, Ontario. I'm also the main principal here at Supertax.ca. Welcome to my video blogs. Today's topic is the eligible dependent tax credit. Now, what is it and where is it? Well, first of all, where is it? It can be found on Schedule 1 of your T1 General Canadian Individual Tax Return, specifically Box 305. Secondly, what is it? Well, it's a non-refundable tax credit with a value of up to $10,527. It can be claimed both federally and provincially. Now, there are some conditions for eligibility for this tax credit. The first one being you cannot have a spouse or common law partner during the year, and if so, they weren't living with you. Secondly, if you had a dependent, you were supporting them, such as for food and shelter and clothing. And thirdly, that dependent must live within your household. Now, if you've met those three conditions, then we go to the two groups of categories in which the dependent may come from. The first category is for older individuals such as your mother, your father, your grandmother, or your grandfather. They're only subject to the income limitations. The second group is younger people such as your child, your grandchild, or your brother or sister. They can be a blood relative, marriage relative, or an adoptive relative. Now, under this second category, you have to be either under the age of 18 or suffering from a mental or physical impairment. Now, if you do choose a dependent who is suffering from a physical or mental impairment, be sure to have some sort of correspondence with a signature from a doctor as support just in case of a CRA audit review. They do come quite often when you do claim this tax credit. I know that from my own personal experience. So I would advise you to make sure you have that information handy. Now, what are situations where you cannot claim the eligible dependent amount? The first situation is where you are claiming a Box 303 non-refundable tax credit for a spousal amount. That happens when, say, you have two spouses and one of them has less than the basic federal amount of $10,527 during the year, and the second spouse is able to claim the difference as an additional tax credit. There is one situation where you can be married and also claim the eligible dependent tax credit. I'll get to that later in this video. But that is, first of all, the first situation is where you are claiming Box 303. If you are, you cannot claim the eligible dependent in Box 305. The second situation is where you're trying to claim as a dependent someone who is also being claimed by someone else. Now, say for example you are living with your sister and your sister is claiming your daughter as an eligible dependent. Well, then you can't, because one person can only be claimed once as an eligible dependent, and there can only be one eligible dependent per household. Third situation, whereas you're trying to claim a child who are you making child support payments on behalf of. You cannot claim that person as an eligible dependent unless you are, for part of the year, separated or not living with your current spouse, and you are making support payments on behalf of that spouse, and you are not claiming them on line 220 of your income tax return for support deductions. If you are not, then you can claim that child as an eligible dependent. Another situation, which I mentioned before, that I want to bring up, is when you can claim the eligible dependent when you in fact have a spouse. That usually occurs in the year in which you are getting married. So say for example, and I'm going to give this example, you are a man and you have support of a daughter. You have just been divorced for 2 years, okay, and you had custody of that child, so you've probably been claiming the eligible dependent amount for a couple of years. So 2011 comes along and that person decides to marry someone in July of 2011. Now, they will most likely file their income tax return at the end of 2011 as a couple, so you'll have two spouses, but you also have a child that you were supporting as an eligible dependent for the first half of the year. In that case, you can claim the eligible dependent amount for $10,527 as long as your spouse has income greater than $10,527. Therefore, she is not eligible for the Box 303 spousal amount. That is the only situation where you can actually do that. Now, say, for example, if you married that spouse had no income in 2011, well, then you'd obviously be claiming the 303 spousal amount, and you'd be getting her full spousal credit, but then you can't claim the eligible dependent for your daughter. The next year you wouldn't be able to either. That's the only situation where you possibly could when you do have a spouse. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. If you have any further questions on the eligible dependent amount, feel free to send me an email, peter@Supertax.ca, or you can leave me a note below. You can also check out my website, www.Supertax.ca. There's plenty of more blogs available on various topics amongst Canadian income tax or U.S. income tax. Thank you very much.